All right, in this video, we're going to talk about Star Trek the Motion Picture, or as some wags have called it, Star Trek the Motionless Picture. There's a reason for that, and we'll tell you in a minute. Hello out there, I'm the oldest nerd. On September 15th and again on September 18th, Fanthom Events is going to present a special big screen theatrical presentation of Star Trek the Motion Picture. This will be the first time since about 1980 that this picture has been seen on big movie screens. And if you have never seen this movie in the theater before, you owe it to yourself to see it then. Even in its original form, it was very much eye candy, and while the plot didn't really go much of anywhere, and we'll talk about that in a moment, the visuals were stunning, and especially for those of us who had not seen Star Trek for anything except for the original series reruns, it was an incredible step up. They went out and went all in as far as the money was concerned. Star Wars had just come out a few years earlier, and Paramount was saying, what can we do? What can we do to get some kind of attention like Star Wars did? And so they went out and hired the best director they could get, which was Robert Wise. He had directed The Sound of Music and I believe the Andromeda Strain. He was a good director, a world-class director. And they were willing to spend the money necessary to do the special effects right. And they hired Douglas Trumbull, who had done the special effects for 2001: A Space Odyssey, to supervise this. He'd already been on the Paramount lot working on other projects, and there's all kinds of stories as to how he almost didn't do it, but we'll just let it go there that he was involved in the film and even directed some of the scenes in which they were heavy in special effects. As we said, it was influenced by 2001. Wise's idea was to make this a spectacle in the old Hollywood style of doing spectacles. And in fact, the way that 2001 was done, where they had long shots of the ship going by and people walking through it and things like this, long stretches where there was no dialogue, was exactly what they intended to do, although this film was kind of criticized for it as being kind of slow and not very well paced, but it really wasn't what their intention was to do. They wanted to make something that was visually beautiful, and I think to that extent they succeeded. Now, in the meantime, they have come out with a version of this film which was the director's cut. And the reason they did is because there are two things that happen whenever you make a film. You either have enough money or you have enough time. You rarely have both. And in this case, where they had enough money, they did not have enough time. And they were rushing this film to its completion. It takes a long time to do a special effects film even now. And back in the late 70s and early 80s, it was a much more frame-by-frame process than it is now. No real computer assist in the ways that we're familiar now. So they had to rush, and in fact, story was that one of the last reel that was finished was sent to the theaters separately, and some of them arrived at their destination still wet. So that involved some very rushed jobs, and some of the effects were not done in the way they wanted them done, and some of the editing wasn't done in the way that they wanted it done just because they didn't have time. So I would hope that this presentation will be the director's cut, which they did the special effects as they were originally storyboarded, and they did it to look like what would have been done during that time. They also restored it, some of the scenes that had to be cut because of the lack of special effects ready for all of the scenes. So that fills in also some of the gaps in the narrative there to understand why Scotty was so concerned about Peter Preston when he was injured in the first V'ger attack. It would also have some explanation of what Ilea was and was about as she came on the ship. The cast had already been put in when Roddenberry had started work on Star Trek Phase 2. It was already in development and pre-production about the time that Paramount decided to make a motion picture instead of a TV series. They were going to start their own network, and Star Trek Phase 2 was going to be the star of that network. Interestingly, some of the sets inside were built for the TV series. They were gussied up a little bit to dress them up for a higher resolution film that you would find in the movies. And the model was completely redone. The original model looked more like Discovery. And in fact, that's where the model for Discovery came from, was one of the concepts for the Enterprise in Star Trek Phase 2. I found that kind of interesting. I hope you do too. So add to the rush in which they had to make the picture the technological advances that were yet to come, the fact that Robert Wise wanted more of a spectacle picture than a high dialogue picture, and the fact that he really didn't like William Shatner very much. He did not think that Shatner was that powerful an actor and tried to minimize the amount of dialogue that Shatner had during the picture. Now, the original cast, as we said, was already picked for Phase 2. Leonard Nimoy was not going to be part of it, so they had already cast a science officer whose name was Zahn that was going to be in the Phase 2 Enterprise. And as Leonard Nimoy wanted to be in the motion picture, they had to get rid of this officer, by this time renamed Sonak, and so they contrived a transporter accident to get rid of him. The actor that was going to play the Vulcan science officer was actually repurposed into one of the officers on the Epsilon 9 space station. There are some production photos of him in makeup that, in some of the old uniforms, interestingly, that showed him as a Vulcan. He might have done pretty well with that. So all of this has been done because of the 40th anniversary of the Star Trek motion picture. And if we do see even the original theatrical version, I think that you'll be very impressed with it. It'll probably be on a digital recreation on this, but the original was done in I think 60 millimeter and then down to 35 for theaters, but still very much a beautiful picture to look at, and a lot of work went into a lot of little things that you might not notice. For instance, Douglas Trumbull said in an interview that there was the shot between Kirk and Scotty shooting over their shoulders in the shuttle pod of the going to the Enterprise was a special effects shot that was very difficult to do. Even Star Wars a few years earlier, in doing their battle scenes, you could see blue lines around their fighters, which were matte lines. It was difficult in those days to hide the places where the mats were made in order to make all these special effects. And you don't see any matte lines in the motion picture, not in the original one, and certainly not in the digital director's cut, if this is what we see. But anyway, we think that this is something that's worthy of seeing. It's September 15th and 18th as a Fanthom event in a theater, hopefully near you. Hope you enjoy it, and if you intend to see it, let me know, and let me know what you think of the film in the comments below. And also, if you haven't subscribed already, please do. We'd love to have a few more subscribers on, and ring the bell if you have not yet, in order to make sure you don't miss another one of these episodes. So, until next time, don't go far.